Welcome to Built for This. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. My podcast features captivating conversations with intriguing people who have found purpose in their lives through their career, family, or life experiences, and just why they were built for this. Through the stories that you will hear, I trust that you will be inspired and encouraged to find just what you were built for. So let's get started. And welcome back in again for another episode of our show. And this is a real treat and a pleasure for me to be able to welcome to the episode this week a guy that, I go way back to my radio days in Dallas, and he was with the NBA Dallas Mavericks at the time. We were both cutting our teeth in our industry. And he's had a lot of very interesting stops along the way in the world of communications and public relations. And we're going to talk about all of that. And so my guest on the show this week is the great Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, thanks for joining me this week.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Really honored to be part of the your new adventure here with Built for This.
And we're going to talk about that, Built for This. How did you know early on that you were built for this, that communications was going to be the avenue that you were going to travel?
It goes back to August 26th, 1965, when I was 6 years old, and my dad took me to my first White Sox game. My brother, who was older than me, had been to a game. And I walked into Comiskey Park, and a couple of things happened. Not only, just that feeling you have when you walk into a ballpark as a little kid for the first time, and you see the magnitude and the spectacle and just how cool it is. But my dad also bought me a White Sox yearbook.
Oh,
I have it right here.
Oh, look at this.
The Exciting Story of the White Sox.
Memorabilia.
Yeah. I brought a prop.
I love it. Well done.
And I have carried this with me, the 60 years since then. And I think studying this, and you go through it, I've got it all taped up. I made notes on all the pages. I noted when guys were sent down to the minors or traded or whatever. And for whatever reason, I think I felt early on that I was not going to be a catcher or second baseman with the White Sox. And then eventually I figured out I wasn't going to be the general manager of the White Sox, which is, of course, the all-time sports fan job that, it looks way easier than it is.
Yeah.
So I figured out at some point that, and I don't even know if I knew what communications was, but I figured out at some point that this might be a way that I could work in sports. At a very young age. And then, I was a weird kid. I remember when one time my parents had a Christmas party at our house on a Sunday evening, and I made up little booklets with the scores of that day's NFL games and passed it out to all the men at the party. Those were my first set of game notes or whatever.
Yes.
I was probably, 8 or 9 or something. But I just always was drawn to that combination of writing, speaking, and sports kind of put together, which, I did all the stuff you do. High school, news sports editor, worked on the yearbook, was a baseball manager for 3 years. I did all the stuff around sports that I could do. I held my own in the intramurals. I still tried to play, but I wasn't going to be good enough. So it was really that was really why communications. And in fact, one little thing I would add is my fellow NBA PR directors and I used to talk about this sometimes, that when it comes to sports PR, most sports PR professionals are there for the sports, not the PR. And years later, I had early in my consulting career, starting in 2009, I had an arrangement, an affiliation with Weber Shandwick, thanks to Ken Luce. And I would go to these meetings with this, one of the largest global communications agencies. And I realized they were there for the PR, like they, and not whatever the subject was. But I think PR is a way into sports for a lot of us. And that was kind of how it was for me.
Well, I know that all of us, at that time, all of us who were on the media side, which is I was at that time, and met you in like 1980, 81, in your early beginnings with the Dallas Mavericks. And then to watch your career and the way that you, the way that you handled the media and accommodated the media during all those times, you're certainly built for that. You were the quintessential public relations advocate and representative. So let's talk about
one thing on that.
Yeah.
Brian, is Norm Sanju gets the credit for that because I learned something from all these cool jobs that I've been blessed to have the opportunity to do. But Norm instilled service in everyone. That was sort of the lifeblood of working at the Dallas Mavericks, whatever your department was. In fact, we didn't call it public relations or media relations. Norm called it media services.
Okay.
So I appreciate you saying that, but that was really kind of the way Norm coached us and trained us all to conduct ourselves on the job.
Well, services was, you over-serviced the media. It seemed like back then it was always a pleasure to cover the team. So you mentioned Norm. You come from Purdue University, and not long after that, somehow you land with the Dallas Mavericks. How did that happen that you're able to get here at the early beginnings of when the team's awarded to Dallas the franchise from the NBA?
The theme that runs through everything kind of in my journey is relationships.
Yeah.
And my dad knew a guy. You remember before Reunion Arena had just opened for WCT tennis.
Yes.
But the Mavericks offices had not yet been built into the basement of Reunion Arena. So Norm had rented some space in an office building at Hillcrest and LBJ. And just as fate would have it, my dad knew somebody who also had office space in that building. I sent the guy my resume. His name is Jack Kinder, in the insurance business in Dallas. And he passed along my resume and letter to Norm, and it ended up, and you're gonna love this. It ended up in the hands of the great Dave Burchett.
Oh yes,
who of course would go on to a long career as an Emmy award-winning director for the Mavericks and the Rangers for decades.
Yes.
But Burchett was kind of the original PR director in the early days. The first summer, that summer of 1980. And, Burchett's from Ohio. He's an Ohio State fan. Norm was from Chicago. So he was a kind of a Big Ten fan. And so that was kind of my original connector. But I'll tell you, and this is a little bit of a lesson I try to leave with young people, is I talked my way into the interview, paid my own way because they weren't like flying people in for this PR assistant job.
Yeah. So
I hustled my way to Dallas. And then when we met, I was 21. But Dave asked me, can you handle the stat crew? And I could tell he was nervous about the stat crew. And I had been on the stat crew at Purdue for a whole bunch of sports, including, volleyball and wrestling and women's basketball and men's basketball. And of course, in football, we all did something. I wasn't on the stat crew for football. I did notes during football, but I was on those crews. And I just shot off my mouth. I just said, I can do that. Don't worry about it. I got it. And that, so I tell young people, when you're interviewing for a job, figure out the pain point of the person who's going to do the hiring. Because I'm convinced to this day that my experience on the stat crew for the Purdue Boilermakers, Gabe Burchett and Paul Phipps was the business manager who would go on to be a GM of the Nuggets and Clippers. I mean, the staff that Norm had originally assembled there, Greg Jameson, there was a number of people that went on to big jobs from there. And it was just that I could relieve Dave of that worry. And so I think that was one of the things that put me in the win column, for that job. So that's how it happened.
And expounding on that, you made a great point that you said that you like to tell young people that might be wanting to get into the industry or communications or PR, that maybe the most important thing is to just be available, to volunteer for something that is maybe way out of the comfort zone. You just gave a great example of how that worked out for you. Have you seen that over your course of a long and very successful career, that's one of the biggest encouragements you can give to people that are wanting to go down the same path, is to just be there, and it might not be in your wheelhouse, but just do it.
Yeah, do whatever it takes. I mean, it's an all hands on deck kind of mentality. And, 8th grade, freshman year, do internships, do something at your high school, your junior high, your church, find a way to get some experience in writing, in media, in podcasting, and speaking, and social media. Start young. because most teams will hire somebody that they've had as an intern because they've seen him in action, and so definitely like tell the young people in your life, if you want to work in sports, don't wait till you're a senior in high school or a senior in college. Get going early and find a way to demonstrate what you can contribute.
All right, with the Mavericks, you're there, 20 years, a couple of decades?
Yeah, 18 years.
18 years there with them. So the early years, though, not a lot of great basketball, and then the tide turns. But as a new guy, kind of fresh into this new thing that you're doing, what did you learn quickly that was going to be a big benefit for you in your career down the path? I remember covering the Mavericks from the KRLD staff, and remember that the game notes that would be supplied to us were so extensive and so helpful. I mean, the amount of work that you had to put in behind the scenes to do that. But what kind of things did you learn early on with the Mavs that kind of stuck with you as a foundational points the rest of your career?
Well, you hit the first one, which is do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Your job description is almost irrelevant. Whatever it takes. The second thing is be helpful. And that still kind of fuels me to this day. Just try to be helpful. It's not enough to be right. You got to be helpful. And that was also the esprit de corps we had at the Mavericks. It was a small staff. I think our first year, I think we had we had about 20, 25 employees doing the whole thing. Now the Mavericks probably have 300 or more. And so do whatever it takes. Listen as a young person, learn from your mistakes. You're going to make them, and just see what you can learn from them, and try not to repeat the mistakes, but learn from them and get better. And the other thing too is embrace it. Have fun. Don't approach it like a something that's worthwhile, but also enjoyable. And I think that's a big part of it. Sports is supposed to be fun. There's a lot of ups and downs. But ultimately, the best thing about working in sports, without question, is how much people care about it. In fact, when the Mavericks traded Jason Kidd, I remember my wife, Joe, and I were in line at the AMC Glen Lakes Theater, which
yes,
may it rest in peace, see some movie. And I was wearing a Mavericks jacket, and some guy in line, I don't know why, he said to me, "Do you work for the Mavericks?" And I said, "Yes." And he started complaining about the Jason Kidd trade.
Sure.
And I was fine with it. And later, Joanne said something about it or asked me about it. I said, if I was working at, Windex, the Glass Plus, people wouldn't, the Glass Plus people aren't, nobody's coming up to you saying, "I like Glass Plus better," or whatever,
Right.
And that's the thing, is you get to be a part of something that people really care about. Now that can be inconvenient at times or difficult to manage and absorb at times, but it is so fulfilling to be a part of something that people care so much about and invest so much in emotionally and personally. And, and I remain to this day, all these years later, I sent Norm an email the other day, just telling him thanks, because I've gotten to do a lot of good things, a lot of interesting and fun things in my career. And it all really started with Dave Burchett and Paul Phipps and Greg Jameson and Norm and Alan Stone, who came later.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from Alan. We complemented each other in that he had a media background. But they gave me a shot. They took a chance on me, and I learned so much, and that really kind of was sort of the ignition point for everything that followed, was the lessons I learned there.
You started out by saying a lot of PR people get into the business for the sport instead of the PR. But there's no question that we do get to be around some pretty cool people and cool situations, and there's relationships built. You mentioned Norm Sanju, a longtime stalwart in helping get this franchise here and building it. The great Don Carter, who was the original owner. But some of the relationships that were, exceptionally meaningful to you over the years, maybe the early years, Dick Motta was running as the head coach, and some of the players who jerseys hang in the rafters today with Roe Blackman and Aguirre and Brad Davis. That's got to be some special times for you, I would think.
Yeah, Ro Blackman, I'm in touch with him on a regular basis to this day. He'd be one for sure. He was right in those days. This is how much things have changed. It's like the PR people. We used to go pick the players up at the airport, like in our personal. I'd clean out the van, the minivan or whatever, and go pick up. Well, I didn't have a minivan in 1981. That came maybe
much
in the
later.
90s, but. So a guy like Ro, I had a relationship with him literally from the moment he got off the plane at DFW. And so there's lots of guys like that. I recently reconnected with Mark Aguirre, which was fun. I told him how happy I was to see the love that he received on draft night when the Mavericks, which was really cool, invited him back, for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Alan Stone. I was hired, my first day, I think, was June 2nd, 1980. Alan came in August. And this is where Burchett kind of slid over to the broadcast side. And, Stoneman had been at Channel 4, and he had been at KRLD before that. He was at Channel 4 on TV as a sports director. And so he and I complimented each other well in that he would go out and he worked the speaking circuit. He was at every Rotary Club and Kiwanis Club at lunchtime, breakfast, you name it. And so that gave me the opportunity to do things like the game notes in the program and the media guide at a very early age. And all the while learning from Stoneman about how the media worked.
Yeah.
And I can remember with your KRLD history, you'll love this. Stoneman was also a great advocate for Mavericks coverage. Mm-hmm. And I remember him on the phone. We were in cubicles. I'm in the cubicle next to Stoneman, and I hear him in a very spirited conversation with Brad Sham complaining about the lack of Mavericks coverage and KRLD in the fall. and I hear Stoneman tell Sham, "It's only news if the Cowboys don't continue preparations today for Sunday's game against the Eagles. Come on."
Yes.
And so Stoneman and I think we're a good team, and I learned a lot about it. And then later, as he became the TV voice, and that gave me the opportunity to learn about broadcast production and be in the truck and all that. So I was just extremely fortunate to be in position at such a young age to learn from such talented and experienced people.
You obviously had such a great career there, very well thought of around the NBA. But other opportunities start coming along. I know you were involved, at least at an early embryonic stage, maybe with the Dallas Organizing Committee for the Olympics 2012. Early years.
Somehow those games ended up in London.
They did end up in London, but to no avail to anything of your efforts.
Right. Yeah,
but,
that was a great experience too, primarily because of the time it got me with Tom Luce. And, Ross Perot Jr. had purchased the Mavericks by this time. That happened in '96, and Tom was sort of the Perot family counselor, attorney, and immediately Tom and I hit it off, and he also comes into play with how I end up in Washington D.C. But Ross had asked Tom to head up this effort to put together a bid. Grady Hicks had started it kind of at the grassroots level in Arlington. Yeah. And it started to get serious, and there needed to be some infrastructure. And Ross asked Tom to get loaned executives from various places like TI and EDS and elsewhere. And we got some office space and put together this. So I was still a Mavericks employee, loaned by the Mavericks to this effort. Yeah. And it was a non-sports job. It was city council meetings. It was, and I was in the Alan Stone role there, where I went all around North Texas doing presentations, trying to gather support. It was a tremendous experience. And then before we, kind of in the middle of that, I did that for, I guess, around a year or thereabouts. And it was around that time when I got a phone call from NBC Sports that I didn't see coming. And that led to the post-Dallas chapter of my journey.
Now, let's talk about that. NBC does come calling. And
well, there's a couple lessons here. Yeah. Go ahead, Marlon.
No. We need to explain the Marlon story. Okay, so Everybody calls Kevin Sullivan Sully. I was explaining this, how I got my nickname from you to someone else, but I figured this would come up in the episode at some point. Everybody calls you Sully, but early on in our relationship when you were at the Mavericks, you referred to me as Marlon one day. And I had to figure out, Marlon, what's that all about? So I'll let you tell it how you ended up calling me Marlon.
There was a wide receiver. He actually played quarterback for the Broncos in the AFL and became a wide receiver for a number of NFL teams, most notably the Dolphins.
Yes.
Where he won 2 Super Bowls and actually caught more passes on those Dolphin teams than Hall of Famer Paul Warfield. So this was a really good player, undersized, went to the University of Omaha. This is before it was Nebraska, Omaha, or whatever they call it now. But anyway, so he was a really good, but also one of my favorite players because he was undersized and this kind of speedy, electric kind of guy. And so I just, with you sharing the same last name as Marlon Briscoe, I just started calling you Marlon. But when I thought about it later, his nickname was Marlon the Magician.
Yes.
Because of the way he moved on the field. We should have called you the Magician.
Oh, well, I had no magic tricks in the broadcast side of it. So
but it's kind of sophomore, but that's why I started calling you Marlon.
It's funny because
it did catch on for a short period of time with some other people, I think.
It did. And so I like that. Every time I get an email or a text from you, it's Marlon, and I like that. But yes, back to your career after your you leave the Mavericks after that, like you said, on loan for the organizing committee for the Olympics. Was that before you get to Washington? Is that when you had Weber Shandwick and some of that association in NBC?
No, this is way before that. So this is like December of 1999.
Okay.
And I was actually sitting outside the gym at St. Patrick's School in Lake Highlands, where my daughter was on the basketball team, and I was waiting for her, and I got a phone call from Kevin Monahan, who was a longtime NBC Sports exec, who I had met once or twice, and he asked me about this job heading up communications at NBC Sports. I didn't know at the time they had offered it and been turned down by 3 or 4 people already. Yeah. So they were in panic mode, and my first thought was, I can't do this, because we had just spent all of our money renovating a house in Lake Highlands. We had moved in on Halloween. So we lived in this house. Well, we ultimately ended up living in that house 11 weeks before a for sale sign went in the front yard.
Wow.
So the first lesson, again, for younger people is don't let short-term inconvenience get in the way of something that long-term could be really great. Yeah. Because I kept focusing on the inconvenience of this. The timing is all wrong.
Yeah.
And again, my wife, Jo, lesson number 2 on this is surround yourself with good people. Young people today have a tendency, I think, to crowdsource their big decisions in life. And it's not the best way to go. The best way to go is to talk to a few people who only have your best interest. And Jo is like, let's go. Wow. Let's figure it out. This is a national job. She said to me, this would be like going to graduate school for you. You shouldn't just dismiss this out of hand. And there's a longer version, but that's really what happened. Is I ultimately interviewed in January of 2000 with Dick Ebersol and Ken Shanzer, John Miller, who I actually saw Sunday night after the Ryder Cup in New York. Again, relationships are everything, and I forged some great relationships at NBC. But I just once I got to the point where I was interviewing, I really wanted to get it, and I was fortunate to land the job, and did that for 4.5 years. And then after the merger between NBC and Universal, I was asked to move over to the corporate side for an SVP job with NBC Universal, and I did that for a while before the Bush administration, in the way of Tom Luce, reached out and found me. But the New York years, the NBC years, again, incredible growth experience. I was there during 9/11. We all got deputized to work at NBC News during that period, working on 3 Olympics there, put me in circulation with the corporate side of the company. And by the way, another not that I don't mean to turn this into a public service announcement.
No, I like it.
But another key lesson learned for me is, don't allow yourself to be pigeonholed.
Yeah.
When I showed up at the Mavericks as a 21-year-old, people looked at me as, the game notes guy or the stats guy or whatever. And I always sort of fought that a little bit, where I didn't want to be seen as limited in any way. And that was certainly the case at NBC. I looked at it as I'm part of this big enterprise. How can I contribute while not taking my eye off the ball on what my day job was? What can I learn here? What can I contribute? The Olympics provided that opportunity, and that kind of led to them seeing me in action, which I think led to the invitation to be considered for this corporate job at NBC Universal. The NBC Sports job was a corporate job too, by the way. But also just a phenomenal experience. Learned a ton from the great, there's so many great producers that were there. Molly Solomon, who runs the Olympics now, David Neal, Tommy Roy, Sam Flood, not to mention Dick. And we got to be a part of that with learning a ton about storytelling and building drama. And again, lots and lots we could talk about there, but another great experience.
Yeah, well, let's talk about more about the New York years. And I'd like your point, and you can expand on it even more. A lot of people in whatever line of work they're in, or industry, like you said, to not be afraid to take a leap of faith. As your wife had said, after you're in a house for 11 weeks, why would you even? Or you're thinking, why would I even want to consider something like that? But it could diminish or minimize something that could be even bigger than what you are right now. And I really like your approach and your vision for people when they go to a job to think about what more could it be? What more can I do? What else is out there for me? So did you discover that about yourself, in particularly when you got to New York? Obviously a much different lifestyle living there for your family, right. But professionally, like you said, what you learned, you were exposed to the Olympics, I think maybe a little NASCAR, anything else that NBC had at the time.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, being a lifelong learner is another thing that has been sort of there have been many people who've been a good example of that in my life, including my mom, who's 102.
Wow.
And was always taking continuing education classes, didn't go to college herself, was always continued to learn. And so when you get in a new situation, you mentioned NASCAR. I grew up kind of as an Indy 500 fan. I liked, that was sort of a once a year kind of event in the Midwest. I liked it. It was, I went to the time trials with my dad one year, but I'd never really focused on NASCAR at all. And when I got to NBC, we had signed the agreement, but had not yet started producing the races. So I got to take a lap around, not literally, figuratively take a lap around the sport, meet the media, meet the people at NASCAR. And I was like a sponge. Like I wanted to learn everything I could about the sport and how we could be helpful at NBC to make it even bigger. The same was true. We had the Triple Crown of horse racing. I had no exposure to that before. And whether it was the Olympics or arena football or whatever it was we had at various points, we had to be creative. I was there. We walked away from baseball after 2 years. We did not have the NFL when I was there. We had plenty of great stuff. A lot of golf. At that time we had the U.S. Open. Was the one major we had, along with the Players Championship and some other golf, Ryder Cup. But we had to be creative. But I love to learn. I love learning about just listening and learning and seeing like how could our team, and I had a phenomenal team at NBC Sports with Mike McCarley, Cameron Blanchard, Kathy Connors, those three primarily, who we had a blast. But you're right, it was a high stakes situation, a little more pressure there than other places I've worked maybe. And you said the lifestyle, I would take the train into Grand Central, and I'd pop out of the train station at 47th and Madison, and you just sort of take a deep breath, and it's like, all right, here we go, baby. It's it's exhilarating. It's just, and I was there 5.5 years, and I could have stayed longer, but it was a lot, but it was an exhilarating, really great time in my career that I remain grateful for those relationships, many of which I I still carry on today.
You know, you're such a great example of not being afraid to try something new, and like you mentioned, like being a sponge and absorbing it, and how can you be better? You know, your NASCAR experience almost parallels my experience when I went to Texas Motor Speedway to be on the media relations staff there. I had never seen a race live in my life, and I was like you. I was a pretty good Indy 500 fan. Certainly had not really seen or followed much of NASCAR, but, the Speedway was interested in my media background and my contacts and relations in Dallas-Fort Worth. So I was like you. I went out there and just absorbed. I was fascinated by the industry, the cars, the teams, the technology, the strategy. And so, I probably pick up a little bit from your career over the years to always be a sponge. And so then in kind of correlation with that, along comes another opportunity for you, certainly out of the sports world, but Washington, D.C. I mean, you tell a little bit about how that started. I think it was the Department of Education, maybe the first in the Bush administration.
Right. What happened there was one day I'm riding the train from Westchester County, where we lived, into New York, and I get an email from the aforementioned Tom Luce. And this is January of 2005. President Bush has just been sworn in for a second term. And Tom sends me this email on my BlackBerry in those days. And it said, "Would you be interested in a senior communications position with the administration in Washington?" And I wrote back and I said, "You mean the Wizards?"
Yeah, that one.
And I figured it had something to do with education, because he was an advocate for public education reform, big time.
Yes.
Still is.
Yes.
And so I figured it was education. And all I remember thinking is, out of respect to Tom, of course, I have to listen.
Yeah.
He meant the world to me, still does. And anything he thought was a good idea or that I'd be a potential fit for, I wanted to listen. However, I also said to myself, there are not adjectives in the English language to describe how little interest I have in this. I figured it was education. I didn't know for sure yet.
Right.
And I'm in this hotshot job at NBC Universal. I had just come back from being, out at Universal in LA, with the movie studio and the lot. We were joking around, forward my calls to the lot. It was, movie premieres, theme park. I mean, it was you talk about exhilarating.
Yeah.
I loved it. And I was learning a lot there too, also working with really talented people. And so Tom, we get on the phone and he says, "You're going to get a call from a woman named Margaret Spellings, who I had never heard of."
Yeah.
She had not yet been sworn in as the Secretary of Education. She was the domestic policy advisor in the first term. I figured that was something like Josh Lyman on the West Wing TV show.
Yeah, exactly.
I just thought, I'm not doing this, but I have to sort of go through the process. Once again, my wife thought it was a good idea, thought it could be an adventure. The work sounded important. So make a long story a little shorter, I end up meeting Margaret for lunch in Washington. This was like the first Saturday of February, I believe, in 2005. And she looks at me over we're in this restaurant. She kind of looks at me over her menu right off the top. And she says, "I don't know what you'll do after NBC, but this will be the most important thing you've done so far." And she's kind of banging the table.
Okay.
She said, "I'm putting a team together. It's going to be great. Only getting good people. You're going to love the president. The work is important. It's going to be great for your family. We don't have a lot of time. And you will always be in the room when it comes to message, strategy, anything with communications. I won't make a move without you. What do you say?"
Wow.
And I thought, wow. And I immediately was hit with, I love the gleam in her eye, the sense of purpose, the sense of urgency. I also felt I was being asked to serve. This was a calling, and that they weren't going to ask more than once, and it was unusual. The job was to be the Assistant Secretary of Education. I still can't say it out loud without chuckling.
Wow.
For communications and outreach. There were regional offices under this umbrella. It was a big, a lot of people. I had never managed or led a number of people like that. And so but I really liked her and just this sort of gleam in the eye thing. So I'm headed back to New York, and I call Joe and I say, we got a little bit of a situation here. And again, she was all for it. So I get back to New York, and I'm on my way home, and I call my dad on the phone. Again, my number one mentor, advisor, counselor. And he said to me, I don't know about this. This is a temporary job. You're going to be 50 years old looking for a job just like the one you have right now. And he said, I love President Bush, but a lot of these politicians in Washington, they're all crooks. It was really funny, but he was very worried. Again, Depression era guy, stability was everything. And he had a son who was a senior VP at NBC Universal and was going to walk away from that for a temporary job because this was a political appointment. When President Bush was done, I was done.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of I just sort of felt the call to service, I guess. I loved her, that look in her eye, like I said. And so I totally slow played it. I really was nervous about how am I going to explain this to these executives, including the chairman of NBC Universal, Bob Wright, who it was great to meet, Randy Falco, who was the president of NBC, who had kind of advocated for me. How am I going to tell them that I'm leaving 30 Rock for what was then known as Federal Building Number 6? Didn't even have a name.
No.
Now it's the Lyndon B. Johnson building.
Okay.
But anyway, so I went through the process. One of the things that Secretary Spelling said to me at one point is, by the way, have you ever done anything to keep us from hiring you? And I said, how far back do they check?
Right, yeah.
So
there was that time in Dallas.
Somehow I got through that. But in any case, that ended. As soon as I got there, I knew it was the right thing. And I was there about 13 months when Dan Bartlett from the White House called asking if I could be over there that day for an interview. So I don't know if you want to segue into the White House.
Talk about that. Yeah, I mean, it's still part of the Bush administration, but you're kind of getting settled into the Department of Education, and then all of a sudden the White House calls. Yeah,
Nicole Wallace was the White House communications director and was leaving to move to New York. And I knew the job was open, and it never occurred to me to apply for it, in part because we were kind of moving the needle a little bit at education on some of the goals we had around No Child Left Behind. And we had a good team there. Again, I'm still in touch with a lot of those people today. But, they asked me, I got an email at 11 o'clock one morning saying, can you be here at 3 o'clock? And, Dan Bartlett was a counselor to the president, which means he was over the White House press office, communications, and speech writing. And really was outside of national security, he was one of the top advisors to President Bush, had been with him for a long time, even though he was still a young guy. And he's from Rockwall.
Oh.
And I didn't know Dan. And when I got this invitation to come over, because the president was out of the country, Dan didn't go on the trip. And I thought, he always was saying, like, we got to catch up. We got to talk about the Mavericks. We got to talk about your time at NBC. And so I kind of almost secretly hoped maybe that's what it was, that it was just kind of a get to know you sort of thing with two sports fans from Dallas. But when you get invited to the White House, you go show up. And Dan, we had a great conversation. He asked me if I was interested. I said, absolutely. Any reservations I had about going from Dallas to New York or other moves that I've made, I was all in. What do I have to do? What do you need? And he asked me, he said, well, your first thing as communications director would be the first two things would be the first anniversary of Katrina and the 5th anniversary of 9/11 in terms of a communications plan. So if you want to work on some ideas on that, go ahead and send me your thoughts. And, because of Iraq, the president doesn't get to talk that much about the strength of the economy, which was humming at that point. And so maybe some ideas on that. And there were a couple other things. Immigration reform was coming. And, I didn't know anything about any of this stuff really. And so that night, like I'm working on kind of a memo with some ideas on these things, and I'm kind of laughing, chuckling to myself, like these guys in the West Wing are asking me for ideas about how to talk about the economy or comprehensive immigration reform or these two big anniversaries coming up. But it was exhilarating. I don't know if they ever even read what I sent them or not. We never really doubled back to that. But I had 9 interviews, and the ninth one was with the President of the United States in the Oval Office in July, early July, right after his birthday, I remember, after the 4th of July South Lawn party in 06. And Bartlett told me the interview would be personal in nature. He's not going to be asking you about communication strategy ideas. It's sort of a chemistry check. And but how do you prepare for an interview, a job interview in the Oval Office? So I was, like anybody would be, I was freaking out. And I thought, and people think that I may have known him from Dallas. I did not. I had met him once on a photo line at a South Lawn T-ball game, as a matter of fact, when I was at education. But anyway, so I had thought, how do I make my sports background a connector here? How can I make that work for myself without seeming, without coming across like some guy who's in 7 fantasy leagues and has nothing else to offer? And I figured it out. And I just thought, how am I going to deploy this? And then President Bush played right into my hands. Another good lesson is turn off your cell phone ringer for young people.
During an interview. No worries.
During an interview.
Yes.
So I'll back up just a little bit. So I came up with this idea for how I could bring my sports background into the conversation. And President Bush played right into my hand. He opened up. Well, first of all, I walked in and I said, "Sir, it's an honor to be here." And he said, "Yeah, it is. It's an honor for me too. Take a look around. Oval Office, democracy, man. Isn't this cool?" And he put me at ease immediately, which is what he does, for people who he knows are going to be nervous in a moment like that. Yeah. We sit down. He glances on the end table. There's this briefing paper with my name at the top, which was a little unnerving. Yeah. And he glanced at it and he said, "I know you're at education with Margaret. I know you were with NBC, and I know you were with the Mavericks, but where are you from?" Oh. And I looked at him and I said, "Chicago, sir. White Sox, not Cubs." And he loved that. I knew he was an American League guy.
He's a baseball
Jerry
guy.
Reinsdorf, the White Sox owner, was instrumental in bringing him into baseball.
Yes.
And so that was our initial connection, was around baseball.
Well played.
Which is also, by the way, I said one of the great things about working in sports is that people care so much. It's also one of the greatest connectors. If you can find a shared experience that you can highlight with someone, sports is often the way you can figure that out. And that's where we got started, and it launched our conversation, that interview. I couldn't believe I got the job. In fact, George Stephanopoulos said to me, we had lunch, I was on the job about 5 weeks, and he said, "I can't believe you got this job." And when I say that, he didn't say it, he said it with some affection.
Sure.
And what he meant was, people toil in the political vineyard, working campaign after campaign for years to get an opportunity to work at the White House. And yet I had this opportunity. And, Margaret is very close with President Bush, and she vouched for me, and Tom Luce had vouched for me before that. And they were looking for new perspectives in the second term. But I was really from outer space. And I'm sure I said things in meetings that were completely ridiculous, but I trusted, just rely on my instincts. Skills definitely translate from one thing to another. Yeah. You have found that in your career. You're one of the people who's made a successful transition from the journalism side to the communications strategy side, and now you're doing other great things like the Built for This podcast. So I just, I encourage people, man, be curious, believe in yourselves, don't let anybody else discourage you. And surround yourself with good people who are going to have your best interests at heart and give you good advice. And by the way, when I got the White House opportunity, my dad said to me, "I told you that education thing wasn't big enough for you," or something like that. Yeah. but anyway, I've just been extremely fortunate. Always surrounded by really good people, and just real grateful for all of it.
I like your words, your encouragement words to other people of be curious, be available, be eager, all those kind of things, all of which you obviously were. Boy, Sully, when you look back at those 1980s and you're doing game notes for all of us, and then fast forwarding that you're sitting in the White House with President Bush, those years in Washington obviously were nothing at all to do with sports, but you mentioned translatable skills. What did you learn in those times that you still are using now? Because you obviously have your own communications consulting business.
Well, I would get home from work. We'd get in. People always say, "What was the day like?" And I'd get in at 6:45 ish. That's kind of when President Bush got in, and give or take a few minutes, and we'd leave at say 7:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd get home at 8 o'clock, and that 8 to 9 o'clock hour, I would make sure it was with the family and have a late dinner or do whatever with the kids or help with homework or whatever. They were always curious, asked a lot of questions. And, because of things like Air Force One and Marine One and motorcades, we could cover a lot of ground. So I'd come home and I would say, well, today we were in Little Rock and Chattanooga, and I'm already home, So my family was enormously supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously they would have to be starting with Joanne, but Joe would then watch me cram from like 9 till 10 for the next day.
Yeah.
And, trying to figure out, like, we have some alternative energy event. What's switchgrass? Like, I have no idea. And I didn't have to know all the policy, but I had to know what the media would ask about.
Yeah.
So I had to be fluent enough. And so I was like cramming for a midterm, like every night, and so she observed this and said to me, why don't you have some of those really smart young policy people come to your office and just ask them, like, talk it out, listen to them, have them explain the stuff. And that's what I started doing. And it is exhilarating how much cool stuff you learn when you're working there, because everything lands on the desk of the President of the United States, every big issue. And so I loved that. And, one of those young policy people that came and met with me about switchgrass and ethanol and alternative fuels and all this stuff is now the head of it's what Google used to call the Moonshot Project. I think it's called Google something else now.
Yeah.
But, there were all these incredibly talented, smart young people there. And to be surrounded by them and to learn from them was really cool. And it was a good way for me to get up to speed on how to brief the president before an interview or whatever it might be. That I was called upon to do. So I was a good thing to learn there. And just the other thing about that White House team, everybody pulling in the same direction. No egos. There's less politics probably in the West Wing with President George W. Bush than almost anywhere else I ever worked. And so, in fact, Mike McCurry, who is regarded one of the best press secretaries of our era, worked for President Clinton, and I had the opportunity to exchange emails with him. I forget, it was close to the end of our time at the White House. Mm-hmm. So this is, late 2008, let's say. And he said, take a look around and enjoy this, because in your career, you may never again work with this many talented people who are all pulling in the same direction. And that was a great learning or takeaway, and that was how President and Mrs. Bush constructed it. We had very little, there was really no ego involvement or camp building or that sort of thing that took place. And so just obviously an incredible experience. And every day, I would walk in that basement door to the West Wing, and I would kind of tap the door and say a little prayer. God, please help me not mess this up today, because, there was a limited amount of damage I could do at the Mavericks or even NBC. But I didn't, I could mess something up big time if I did the wrong thing there. So, but I never took it for granted. Just tried to, do my best and appreciate it. And to this day, I think about that experience every single day. Almost, more than, let's see, 16, 17, almost 17 years later. So,
wow. Well,
what an honor.
Was an honor for you. I can only imagine. And so, you took an amalgamation, a culmination of everything you've done for 40 something years in a career, starting in sports and now you have Kevin Sullivan Communications, which I know you're involved in so many high visibility projects and clients across the country. So I just watching your career and watching you work every day is still quite a motivator for all of us in the business. So I say keep doing what you're doing, and I really appreciate you being on the show with me today.
Well, I really appreciate the kind words. And, I haven't mentioned the great Tony Fay, what he's created with Tony Fay PR is nothing short of spectacular. I went the consulting route. Tony built a business, but Tony was the one who encouraged me more than really anybody to go out on my own, along with my wife, to go out on my own back in 2009. And that's also been a great ride and really rewarding. And I really am grateful to you, too, for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. Brian, and good luck, or Marlon, good luck with the series, and let's keep in touch.
All right, Sully, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of Built for This. Be sure to follow Built for This on your favorite listening platform and share it with a friend. Join me on the next episode when I will share entertaining stories of inspiration, encouragement, and purpose-driven experiences. What are you built for? Built for This is produced and recorded by Heart Media DFW.